America is keen to mend the relationship between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Israel, but Mohammed Bin Salman has hefty demands. Is the deal worth the price? And where does Israel fit into this new regional equation? Here is our interview with Dr. Michal Yaari. Dr. Michal Yaari, thank you so much for joining us today. So we're speaking about Saudi Arabia and this very interesting personality of MBS, Mohammed Bin Salman, who is changing the kingdom. Do you think his term is arriving? He's about to take full responsibility?
לחלוטין. אני חייבת להגיד לך משהו על מוחמד בן סלמן, הוא מאוד הפתיע אותי. אנחנו מדברים על בחור שבעצם...
Absolutely. I have to say one thing about Mohammed Bin Salman. He actually surprised me quite a bit. He came to power at a very young age, 29 years old. He celebrates his 38th birthday this month.
מוחמד בן סלמן היא ממלכה מנומנמת. היא ממלכה שיש פער אדיר בין הפוטנציאל שלה לבין...
And during this short period in power, he managed to turn Saudi Arabia all the way around. Before MBS, Saudi Arabia was a sleepy kingdom with a huge gap between its potential and the ability to fully achieve it. It is right at the center of the region, financially, politically, and religiously. However, it was not a country that enjoyed the status and was treated as a regional superpower until now. MBS basically said, forget everything you knew about Saudi Arabia. I'm going to turn the kingdom into a country that is attractive not only to Muslims, but also to foreign investors, to tourists. The most influential world leaders will visit here. It will be a sports powerhouse. He pledged to completely overhaul women's rights, and in a very short period, he was able to achieve all of the above. One more thing I'd like to add. MBS is a very complex figure. He's very difficult to swallow, especially for researchers, academics, and politicians. Why? Because it's difficult for us to accept a personality that has multiple dimensions. We like the binary people, 0 or 1. Do we like him or do we hate him? MBS shuffled the deck here because he has shown that he can be a ruthless murderer who has no respect for human rights and still be able to lead his country to places no one has ever dreamed it will get to. The question now is, what do we do with him? Should we help him lead Saudi Arabia even further, or do we draw a line and say, we can't be part of this? I really cannot answer this question.
So before we ask what we do, I want to stay with him. You've put a long list of things that he's doing. How does he do it facing the very conservative system of Saudi Arabia? Not only his father, the whole system surrounding his father, the religious people, they are far behind, and he wants to go further. How does he do it?
אז מה שמדהים בסיפור הסעודי, וזה בעצם סוד ההצלחה של הממלכה הזו, זה שהיה לחץ מלמטה.
The amazing thing about Saudi Arabia, which is actually the reason this move was successful, is that pressure came from the bottom up, a real grassroots phenomena. The public made it very clear that they were not interested in living under strict religious rule that was forced on them. It was ridiculous that young people could not watch a movie at the movie theater because it was against the values of Islam. Same for the issue of women's clothing or employment options compared with what their peers in Western countries can enjoy. The people opposed all of that, and they opposed the fact that they did not choose this way of life. They were forced into it. This is especially true today, at the age of globalization where everything is out in the open. Saudi Arabia was paying for thousands of its young citizens to study abroad and bring knowledge and experience back to the kingdom. This situation was absurd and abnormal in every way. MBS simply listened. He heard the aspirations of the majority and turned them into reality. Let's pause for a second and talk about what we call the Saudi public. Saudi Arabia is an extremely young country. 75% of its population is under the age of 35. Millions of young people. They do not live in mosques. Their life is on social media. They buy Western products online or study in universities there. They have connections with other young people all over the world, so that life, that primitive way of life, simply did not fit them.
But how do you do it, Michal? It's easy to do it relatively when it's at the UAE with 900,000 people living there, locals. It's easy to do it in Qatar with 300,000 people. Saudi Arabia is a huge state with millions upon millions of people. which is much harder to do it.
Not exactly. The main difficulty we could mention would be from the religious establishment. How are they allowing it to happen? But no, the religious establishment has a dependency on the royal family that's crucial to its survival, money, and status. Once they realized that if they resist these reforms which are promoted by the monarchy, they were about to lose those important assets. They knew they had to change. Another important issue on that point, the religious establishment underwent substantial reform in recent years. If in the past religious leaders would denounce the use of social media, nowadays every imam who wants to reach an audience of believers turns to social media. In addition, one other fairly small but important point, the issue of cosmetic surgery. They were completely banned in the past, but today, looking at the world around them, where physical appearance is an important part of the message, many clerics are undergoing cosmetic procedures themselves to meet the demands of the new public and reach maximum crowds, turning Saudi Arabia into an Arab world leader in the field of cosmetic surgery. So the clergy understand that they needed to change, otherwise they were about to lose not only the assets given to them by the monarchy, but their most valuable possession, the Saudi public.
And how far away is he willing to go? Because he's still the guardian of Mecca and Medina, the holy places for the Muslims. He wants to be the center of the Arab world. So with this game of, facing these two ends, how long is he willing to go?
MBS sees no difficulty there. He has a very set and accurate agenda that says the following: the extreme Wahhabi Islam, as it was implemented in Saudi Arabia, does not fit us anymore. It ruined the country, severed relations with other states, and did a bad service to Muslims in general. MBS wants to present a new version of Islam, which is reformist, moderate, and pragmatic. What does that mean? Well, this year, Saudis marked Christmas and Valentine's Day. It might not sound like much, but for a country like Saudi Arabia, it's a big deal. They realize that marking Christian holidays does not make them less Muslim, or the fact a woman does not dress according to the strictest Sharia rules does not mean anything about her religious commitment. MBS brings a version of Islam that is much more compatible to the way people live their lives in the 21st century, and there's no obstacle for it, except for minor opposition, which is normal.
So what you're saying is this double game that Saudi Arabia played for many years, like making dark deals with Al-Qaeda and with ISIS, and being affiliated to their leaders, and money going from here to there. That has ended.
That's all over. Look, when 9/11 happened, the Saudis were saying they were the real victims of Al-Qaeda, and for much longer too. Al-Qaeda was carrying out attacks in Riyadh in the mid-90s, long before 9/11. So at that point, the Saudis wanted to spearhead the global fight against radical Islamic terror. They still want to cement their status as a central player in the Muslim world, but the message is way softer and moderate today. I recently ran across a study done by a British think tank, which looked into Saudi textbooks for changes in them in the last 5 years. They found major shifts, particularly in the anti-Israel rhetoric. No more anti-Semitic content, less anti-Zionist messages. It does not mean that Israel would become Saudi Arabia's best friend, but it means the change in the religious perception is dripping into the textbooks and to the public.
So I can eyewitness for myself. I visited Riyadh a year ago, last summer. The elderly people, stay far away when you say you come from Israel. The young people are very much attracted. They ask questions. They want to understand. They even want to visit if it was possible for them.
It's very simple. When you speak about the older generation, which was represented by MBS's father, King Salman, it was a generation of people who saw Israel as an enemy. It was up close and personal too. They have not confronted Israel directly, but they saw their brothers in Egypt, Jordan, and Syria defeated by Israel, humiliated by Israel. If you speak to a 30-year-old Saudi now, they know Israeli music, they are familiar with our food, our culture, and they do not see that figure of the ruthless Israeli occupier that their parents and grandparents saw. There is lots of curiosity towards Israel on the account of it being a tech superpower. They see things in Israel that they would very much like to have in their own lives. Therefore, if I was to advise Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I would suggest they focus on strengthening Israel's image as a safe place for the LGBTQ community at the heart of the Middle East. This is still a red line across the Muslim world, and if Israel is able to position itself as a beacon of liberalism in the sense of allowing and accepting elements that are still strictly forbidden in Muslim countries, it might improve Israel's public image even more.
בעצם לתת מענה לאותם דברים שבמדינות ערב אסור, זה מאוד ישפר את התדמית שלה.
How far away is he willing to go, MBS, in this process, reform process that he's leading? Because we even see the city of Neom, which he wants to bring, the new world, the new vision to the world. But where does he want to lead Saudi Arabia?
עד כמה שיותר רחוק. ובמובן הזה הוא צודק. הוא לוקח בעצם מדינה שבה הרוב הגדול של האוכלוסייה...
As far as he possibly can. And he's right by doing so. He took a country in which the vast majority of people worked in the public sector with no standard of knowledge or professionalism. It was a good arrangement because it meant that the state was basically paying people to sit still and do nothing, as long as they do not rebel against the ruler.
הבעיה היא שמגיע השלב שבו האוכלוסייה גדלה מאוד, אי אפשר יותר לממן את כל אותם פרזיטים,
With time, the population grew tremendously, and it was impossible for the government to keep financing all those freeloaders. MBS put a stop to that. He realized this method was not working anymore and wanted to increase productivity among his people. MBS wanted to utilize this resource, the Saudi public, and fulfill its potential. What reason do they have to limit this vision? This new approach develops the society, but also attracts foreign investors because they want to invest in a place that has such a vision and prospect for the future. What will this future hold? We don't know, but in the 7 to 8 years he has been in power, the change MBS has already made is a true metamorphosis and truly remarkable.
So after speaking about the upsides, let's speak about the downsides. First, the Khashoggi case, which still, he carries it with him like a chewing gum stick stuck to his feet.
Look, regarding Khashoggi, allow me to be cynical for a moment and say that he's only just one person, while thousands of people have already died in Yemen and hundreds of thousands affected by the war are held in Saudi jails. MBS would very much like to sweep the Khashoggi affair under the rug, but it is not at all uncommon there. Thousands of people are imprisoned for speaking out against the monarchy or the government. As an example, we can look at the case of Lujan al-Hathlul, an activist who is advocating for women's right to drive, is imprisoned for years without trial in brutal conditions. She was not released even after the restriction to drive was completely removed. In my view, MBS means to send a message to the Saudi public. I am in charge, and I alone will set the pace for reforms. And if there's anyone who thinks they can tell me what to do, they will quickly find themselves in prison, or in a worse case, like Khashoggi. There's a much darker side to this story. Many Saudis will tell you that since MBS came to power, Saudi Arabia has gone backwards in all that concerns human rights. Despite that, we are very comfortable with looking the other way. It helps to settle this cognitive dissonance when dealing with a figure like Mohammed Bin Salman and accept his rule over Saudi Arabia.
As long as it is here, he has a problem with the U.S., especially with Biden's U.S., the Democratic, which he sees this case as, a red line.
Apparently no, because Biden was the one who was completely humiliated here. So was Obama, by the way, who had experienced the same embarrassing scene at the airport in Riyadh. The Saudi logic says the following: no leader or country can dictate to Saudi Arabia how to deal with its internal affairs, not even the U.S. If they do, the Saudis will show what they are capable of, and they will do it when the U.S. needs them the most. That is the explanation to what happened to President Biden on his visit in June of last year. He came to the kingdom to curb the sharp spike in global oil prices, and upon his arrival, there was no one waiting for him at the airport. The leader of the free world, the most influential figure on our planet, publicly humiliated. I hope the American leadership realizes now that this double standard does not work with the Saudis. They cannot keep trying to educate MBS and then ask for his support when they need it. It will be interesting to see what will happen if or when those two paths cross each other once again. Biden toned down his criticism of the Saudis when he realized he is on the losing side of things.
And the fact that we're seeing Saudi Arabia getting closer to China, and by that getting closer to Iran, which are two big rivals of the West. China is the big Satan, if I will use the Tehran way of speak, and Iran is the small Satan when you're looking from Washington, from Israel. It's obviously different. That's tactical, that's strategical.
אני אגיד לך משהו שהוא לא כל...
I will take an unexpected turn here and say that we have nothing to worry about. The Saudis have not changed their perception of Iran as an enemy and their most significant regional rival, which threatens their very existence. There is no change there. What those two countries have been able to understand is that the confrontational rhetoric is harmful for both of them. It's destroying the economy and severely damaging the country's global image. The war in Yemen is at the center of the conflict now, so solving this issue was a key factor in restoring relations. They understand that ending this war is critical to two countries that are aiming to rebuild their ravaged economies. People are looking at the Saudis, but not just at them. Iran has repaired relations with Qatar and recently with Egypt. Does that mean that Israel is all alone now? Absolutely not. If the Saudis and the Iranians find a way to agree not only on Yemen, but also on Syria and other issues they disagree on, is that bad for Israel? On the contrary, it's good for Israel, mainly because the Saudis see Iran as an enemy and a threat to their existence. Israel would have liked these statements to be louder and more public, but the Saudis are not doing that, and it's 100% okay.
I'll offer an idea why Israel is afraid. Israel wanted to build a ring against Iran. An aerial ring with Saudi Arabia and the UAE and obviously Egypt and Jordan and others. Once Saudi Arabia and others are getting closer to Tehran, it means that they're getting away from Israel in a way.
אז זאת החשיבה המאוד קונבנציונלית והנוחה של הרבה מאוד ישראלים, כולל גופי ביטחון ופוליטיקאים.
This way of thinking is quite typical to most Israelis, especially politicians and military officials. If he says A, then we do B. But things are changing in our region. We see now that the definitions have changed, the definitions of allies and enemies in our region. Qatar is a good example. They have shown that they can have a good relationship with the U.S., even with Israel to some extent, and at the same time have deep ties with Iran or the Muslim Brotherhood. And everyone seems to be fine with that. The same goes for Saudi Arabia. It can disagree with Russia on issues concerning Syria, but at the same time expand financial cooperation, even on issues like nuclear energy, in which the Saudis are very interested. What we can learn from it is that if Israel sticks to this attitude of, if they are closer with Iran, they're no longer our allies, we will come out of it on the losing side. Instead, we should learn that in our new region, Saudi Arabia can strengthen ties with our enemies on certain issues, and on others, they can stay close to what Israel needs. And we should focus on our similar interests and expand cooperation around them. Saudi Arabia is warming up to Iran just like the rest of the Arab world, and Israel should ask itself how it can benefit from that. And the answer, at least in my opinion, lies in Yemen and Syria. Once those two issues are settled, the whole region will calm down.
So looking from the Israeli point of view, Israel is very keen of getting closer to Saudi Arabia. That was one of the main four goals that Prime Minister Netanyahu put when he came back into office at the beginning of this year. What should Israel do to achieve that, if it is possible at all?
Israel is making all the possible mistakes here. If I was to make a list of possible mistakes, I would mark every box. Firstly, Israel is not willing to recognize or acknowledge the sensitivities in Saudi society. Saudi Arabia is not just another country. They are the leaders of the Muslim world, and as such, there are limitations, unlike other countries such as the UAE or Bahrain. Therefore, every time Israel, specifically as foreign minister, announces that we are real close to signing a peace treaty with the Saudis, it pushes MBS into a corner and forces a reaction in the fashion that is expected by the rest of the Arab world, emphasizing that no normalization deal will be signed with Israel before a full solution is found for the Palestinian issue. They know all too well that such a solution is not achievable. There will not be a Palestinian state, but Israel's statements force them to react this way. Instead, Israel should have kept this whole dialogue behind closed doors, let professionals do their job, and leave politicians and politics out of it. A good example is our foreign minister, who serves a problematic political agenda, in my opinion. We need to take it one step at a time to slowly build up trust. If we rush forward, we will embarrass the Saudis and encourage and empower factors who oppose this move. We have to let MBS achieve his goal, convince his people to accept the idea of peace with Israel after 75 years of hostility. Those people were taught for decades that Israel is the enemy. Arab Arab leaders had this get-out-of-jail-free card. Blame everything on Israel, the failing economies, internal problems, etc. This card is being gradually taken away from the leaders and the public, so it will take time to change that perception. It's going to be a long process. If Israel does not allow this process to happen naturally, without interruption, we will come out on the bottom end. We already are.
If I would compare it to the Arab world, we are sprinters and they are marathonists. They run for long term and we want to end in 100 meters.
We need to adapt at their pace. That's just how it works. There's no other way, because the benefits of such an arrangement, peace with the Saudis, is unimaginable. It's simply mind-blowing. Because it is not just going to be another peace treaty with an Arab state. It will open Israel's path to other Muslim countries. For example, Indonesia, which is home to the largest Muslim population on the planet, a huge asset for Israel. If we ignore the sensitivity, if we keep pushing the Saudis into those corners, we will simply lose them. It's not going to be worth their hassle. If I try to look at it from a Saudi angle, I would ask why the kingdom needs this peace treaty. Why can't they just keep relations with Israel under wraps, like they are now? For Israel, this move will be a huge game changer, and therefore we are much more interested in it. Israel should act accordingly. If we need it more, then I ask our leaders, please put aside political interest and personal gain and act in favor of the greater good.
כל היום את היחסים עם סעודיה, אלא תשאלו מה המדינה כמדינה צריכה לעשות כדי שבסוף באמת יהיה לנו פה שלום אזורי.
You've used the term in Hebrew, אפשרי, possible. It is possible at the end of the day?
In the current state of affairs, I do not see it happening. Israel is required to provide the Saudis with something they can approach the rest of the Arab leaders with, especially to the Palestinians, and tell them, we have not betrayed you. With the radicals in our government, such as Smotrich and Ben Gvir, and statements like Jordan is not a real country, ask yourself if Saudi Arabia can normalize ties with such a government. One more thing, the Saudis are asking themselves if it is wise to sign an agreement with a leader that does not have the public's full support. It might not be worth the paper it's written on. Why should they do that? Beyond this issue, their major goal is warming ties with Washington. And Washington is giving Israel's current leadership the cold shoulder. What benefit would there be to normalizing ties with Israel?
So bottom line, we want it here and now, and they have time and patience. And if looking from Riyadh, it's not in the horizon.
Everything can change if the government changes, in my opinion at least.
Michal Yaari, thank you so much for joining us today.
תודה.